what's up? Hello, my name is Emma, and welcome to another episode of my recent reads. If you missed my first recent reads, I'll link it down below, but essentially I am just doing my monthly reading wrap-ups, less monthly now, and grouping them together whenever I get a chance. So today I'm going to be talking about the 13 books that I have read thus far in 2020, and I'm really excited. But first, I of course have to give a big thank you to our sponsor for today's video, which is Skillshare. I'm sure you guys have heard me talk about Skillshare before. It is an online learning community with thousands of classes on topics from illustration, design, writing, technology, entrepreneurship, and more. If you find yourself spending more time at home or indoors lately, Skillshare is a great way for you to introduce useful and refreshing content and information into your days. They aim to make learning more accessible and more affordable, with most classes being under an hour each, and their yearly subscription topping out at under $10 per month. A class I recently enjoyed was iPhone Filmmaking, Create Cinematic Video with Your iPhone by Caleb Babcock and Niles Gray. Because I currently film all of my vlogs on my iPhone, I figured this would be a great way for me to improve the quality of them using better techniques and new ideas. I have been using Skillshare for quite some time now, and if you are interested in giving it a try yourself, the first 1,000 people who join using my link in the description will receive 2 months of Skillshare Premium totally free. Joining is at no cost to you, and it really helps support my channel, so I hope you guys give yourself the opportunity to be more creative. So the first 3 books I have recently read are all a part of a series I have been marathoning this year, and that is Lair of Dreams, Before the Devil Breaks You, and The King of Crows by Libri. These are all a part of the Diviner series, which I have been reading as a part of the Diviners Club read-along, which just recently concluded, unfortunately, but if you would like to check out any of our live show discussions for the entire series, I will link those in the description. I listened to all of these on audiobook because January Lavoie is an incredible narrator, and I definitely recommend consuming the series through this format if it's something you enjoy. But I listened to them through a variety of different places, firstly through my local library from the app Libri. I also got a copy on Audible, and finally a review copy from Penguin Random House on the Volumes app. I gave Lair of Dreams 5 out of 5 stars, and I think now I consider it one of my absolute favorites in the Diviner series, which is totally unexpected. This was my second time reading it, and I feel I just appreciated the overall story so much more. It's kind of bizarre how timely this 1920s historical fiction has become, as it follows this plague that no one really knows how it is starting or how to control it, and Asian immigrants are the ones getting the blame for it. But on that note, what I really love about the Diviners, beyond the supernatural elements and the extremely diverse, lovable cast, is all of the different issues that it talks about, like eugenics and the Chinese Immigration Act. With Before the Devil Breaks You, the first time I read it, I think I gave it 5 stars, but I actually dropped it just to 4.5 because I feel like I still loved it, but I didn't enjoy it as much this time around. Before the Devil Breaks You does stand out to me among the other Diviners books because for the first 2 installments, the characters are kind of paired off into their individual storylines, and though we have a large cast of characters, they don't all interact until the very end of Lair of Dreams. So in Before the Devil Breaks You, we get to see them working together more as a group and strengthening their individual friendships to one another, which I really loved. I feel like I'll always have some like low-key gripes about this book with some of the characters and the choices that they make, but overall I think every installment in the Diviner series is really great and fulfilling. And finally we have King of Crows, which is my first time reading it as it only just recently came out, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars as well. I unfortunately think this is probably my least favorite in this series, but overall it was still a very satisfying conclusion. It was kind of long, and I know like all the Diviners books are long, but it felt long. We spent like so much time just on a farm, and I felt like some of that could have been cut out. Some parts of the book and like big twists were pretty predictable, and it was actually increasingly frustrating to watch the characters like not catch on to what was so obvious to me as a reader. The King of Crows is also set up to be the most powerful, threatening villain of the story, but he's actually the least appealing to me. He's got no depth, no intrigue. He's just like the shadowy big bad whose only motive is destruction, and I just felt like this story was capable of more from him. The plot was still interesting interesting. I was totally invested the entire time, and I was really moved by the character development from everyone, even characters that I previously did not like. I was really pleased with where most of the characters ended up, even if I felt some were a little safe, and also the ending itself was like really rushed and wrapped up very quickly for what is such a complex story. But overall, like, I really loved my time reading this book. When it comes to series like The Diviners that I'm so passionate about and super invested in, I definitely get some bias there where, like, because there's so many things already in play for me to love it, I do enjoy it more than somebody who probably isn't as much of a fan. But now that I've read all the books, I can definitively say it is one of my absolute favorite all-time series. I cannot wait to reread it more in the future, and if you have not picked it up yet, I definitely recommend doing so. The next book I read in 2020 was The Hand on the Wall by Maureen Johnson, and this is the third and final installment in the Truly Devious trilogy. To be candid, I was paid to review this book and have talked about it in a reading vlog, and if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on it, I will link it down below. Truly Devious is another favorite series of mine. I believe it is one of like the best YA mystery thrillers out on the market, and it is super complex. I found the conclusion of this story to be incredibly satisfying. Like, a big complaint for even big fans of the series has been that, like, there have been no answers throughout the first books and they always end on big cliffhangers, but I firmly believe that, like, all answers and all loose ends are tied up by the end of this story, and that makes a really good conclusion for me. I feel like the mystery really went an unpredictable route in the end. I think that Maureen Johnson took a lot of risks that many authors wouldn't, and it paid off. This book also solidified how much I really love the dual timeline in this series. The entire series is told half in 1936 at the boarding school when this first murder happens, and then fast forward to present day when the main character is trying to solve it. I was just always so preoccupied with Stevie and David and Janelle and Nate in the present and what they were doing that I definitely did not give as much attention to the past, but in reading The Hand on the Wall, I became way more attached to it and totally want to just flip back and relive just that part of the timeline over again. Again, I can sometimes be a little easy on books that are already part of my favorites, but the one thing I didn't like about The Hand on the Wall is how the ending was wrapped up so quickly. It was kind of like that stereotypical detective delivers every step of the mystery, and I would have rather to have found it all out by myself instead of having it recited. Honestly though, a lot of YA conclusions have been disappointing me, or they just like haven't been wowing me the way they used to, but The Hand on the Wall is definitely one of my new faves. The next audiobook I listened to in 2020 is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, and I once again listened to this from a review copy from Penguin. This is a YA mystery about a girl who has made it her senior project to solve a cold case murder from a couple of years ago in her town where someone she knows was the accused murderer, and she doesn't believe that to be true. One of the main reasons I decided to pick up this book, especially on audio, is that it is a full cast recording, meaning that each character is given their own actor to speak and narrate from, but also it is told in like a podcast type format, so there are like transcripts and emails and newspaper articles that help inform the story along the way. I love audiobooks like that. They're always my favorite, and I thought it was done really well in this book. Unfortunately, I didn't like love the book beyond that. I ended up giving it, I think, 3 stars. One of the things I didn't really like about this book is much of what Pip is uncovering felt like stuff the police would have already known if they had begun investigating this years prior. For example, Pip finds a text message confession from the main suspect, and I'm like, would the police not have known this before her? There were a zillion instances of that, and it was very frustrating because it just felt like a lot of plot holes in order to be convenient for the story. The protagonist is very biased towards this case, which is often very frustrating to read, but at least here, like, she is intended to be. The novel was supposed to tell a story about a girl who was emotionally invested in a case she's trying to solve, and I thought it did a good job of getting that across. The other thing about this book is that it was really predictable. Like, almost nothing surprised me, and that's what I love about mystery thrillers, is typically the twists are so good and unexpected, but I just didn't get any of that from this book. YA mystery thrillers kind of get sorted into 2 different categories for me. There's like the impressive ones, like Truly Devious, and then there's the mediocre contrived ones, like A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, but it was still enjoyable. I found myself invested in the story even if it wasn't the best thriller I've ever read, and therefore I'm not mad I read it. The next book I've recently read is Love Boat Taipei by Abigail Hing Wen. This is a story about a Chinese-American girl who is shipped off to Taiwan by her parents to participate in an elite summer program, But when she arrives there, she discovers that it is really just like one big party and an opportunity for her to truly discover herself. I picked up Love Boat Taipei just because I was looking for like a lighthearted read, and it was surprisingly really satisfying. It felt pretty realistic for a YA contemporary as it dealt with many real issues like depression, dyslexia, dealing with harsh expectations from parents, and also being the child of immigrants. Now let me be clear, there is a love triangle in this book. The horror! The horror! This love triangle was surprisingly refreshing because I don't think there has ever been a time in all my years of reading where I've been presented with a love triangle where I would have been equally happy with the main character ending up with either love interest. Also, I don't think romance was necessarily the biggest theme. It is very present, but the whole story is more about discovering your own independent desires, and that was much stronger than all the love triangles. Okay, it's technically like a love hexagon, but it's like really understated. I promise, don't let it deter you from reading this book. And I feel like because it did that so well, this book just felt like it had so much more quality compared to other YA contemporary fun rom-com coming-of-age stories. There are a few smaller plot points that I wasn't as happy to read about, like cheating and revenge porn, and just like some of the drama was a little unrealistic for me. But overall, I was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed this book. So if you're looking for a YA contemporary that's really gonna fulfill you, I definitely think you should check out Love Boat Taipei. Next up is a graphic novel. I actually have 3 graphic novels in this wrap up. Who am I? But the first is My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness by Nagata Kabi. This is a manga and memoir that tells a story of a young woman who is depressed, who is dealing with her sexual orientation, and has also never had sex and has no direction in life. So it is kind of all about her experience dealing with these issues and how she overcomes them. I found the premise of this book really interesting, and I can't say I've read many books where the first scene is about a lesbian escort agency, but it worked. I was obviously gripped from the start. I found this book extremely relatable to my own experience with depression. Like, there were multiple instances where the author was able to verbalize things I had felt but never had been able to express in all 10 years of me dealing with this illness. I think this book would be super comforting to other people who have struggled to find their own direction in life, to find their thing or a career that they're passionate about. Also, people who are dealing with harsh expectations from their parents and outside influences, or just struggling with self-love and self-confidence in general. There isn't much of a plot outside of all the things that I've listed, but for what it does, it's a really wonderful, heartwarming, and uplifting story, and I would definitely recommend picking it up. Next up on my recent reads, we have what is my current favorite book of the year, and that is of course Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. I don't have like a full book talk ready for this one yet, but I have a spoiler-filled reading vlog where I document my entire experience reading it for the first time, so that's in the description if you want to check it out. Chain of Gold is the first book in the newest series from the Shadowhunter Chronicles. It is set in Edwardian London and follows the children of the main cast of The Infernal Devices. I love Chain of Gold. Obviously, duh. First thing I always think to talk about when it comes to Chain of Gold is the characters. Despite being so connected to so many characters from the Shadowhunter Chronicles in ways that new characters will never be able to replace, this overall is the most well-developed electric cast of characters in the entire saga. Chain of Gold does have a very long setup of like 150 pages before the plot of the book actually sets in, and this is becoming like a more common thing in Cassie's recent works. Honestly though, I'm not bothered by that at all. Some people really don't like it, but it is like sometimes my favorite part of the story to read because I love how deeply entwined and unique the character relationships are in this story, and it took that much time to accurately set it all up. Plus, it was also super fun to read about Shadowhunters who have not grown up in a time of like death, despair, or complete lack of knowledge of the world. It was cool to watch Shadowhunters live in somewhat relative peace and be normal teenagers. Something else I love about Chain of Gold is that the Dark Artifices, which is the series that was published before The Last Hours, it became very focused on Shadowhunter politics, and I love how Chain of Gold kind of goes back to the roots of Mortal Instruments, where the main thread is like fighting demons. Chain of Gold is really just the best of all of the origins of the Shadowhunter Chronicles, but also continuing to explore and flourish as Cassie grows as a writer, and I'm just thoroughly impressed by this book. I loved it so much and it made me feel so many things, and I just cannot wait for the second installment to come out next year. Next up is another graphic novel I read, and that is Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Rosemary Valerial O'Connell and Mariko Tamaki. This book is all about a girl whose on and off again girlfriend keeps breaking up with her. While I finished this book in one sitting, I unfortunately did not enjoy it as much as I really wanted to, and I ended up giving it 2 out of 5 stars. I think I just set my expectations of this book too high and somewhere where the book never intended to really go. I did not connect with any of the characters, which is difficult because this is a character-based book. They had like no personality and they really didn't exist outside of their relationships to other characters. I picked this up because I thought it was going to be fun and cute, and it was just depressing and frustrating. 3/4 of the book is just the main character being very miserable and mistreated, and therefore mistreating her friends and making them miserable. And while this is something that's very reasonable and happens to a lot of people who are teens, it just wasn't enjoyable for me to read about. The plot was very small scale. As I said, it's a super character-based book, and it also was incredibly predictable, so there was so little for me actually to be excited about while reading. Despite the fact that I didn't really like this book, I do still think it is very valuable. Number one, because like queer representation is important everywhere, and these types of stories for queer teens are needing to be told. And I also think it would be helpful to other teens and YA readers who are maybe looking to recognize the aspects of toxic relationships and friendships and leave them. But beyond doing that, I don't think it really added much to that conversation. What I liked about this story is the art style and detail. I thought that was super well done and totally what kept me reading, but beyond that, I just really didn't enjoy this one, and it didn't land with me the way that it has with others. The next book on my list of recent reads is Girl in Pieces by Kathleen Glasgow. Our main character's name is Charlie, and she's had an incredible, difficult life dealing with issues such as self-harm, depression, and homelessness. And it is basically the story of her kind of building up her life after getting out of a psychiatric hospital. Now, it actually took me like a month to finish Girl in Pieces because during this whole quarantine, I ended up not reading for like at least 2 full weeks. I just sort of fell out of it with everyone's routines being disrupted. I did get back into it and finally finished though, and ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. And though people often think that like 3 stars is automatically a bad rating, that's like a really good 3.5 stars. A common criticism I see about this book is that it is too raw and honest and somewhat instructional for self-harm, which I do agree with to an extent, because there definitely is a way to portray what it is like to live with self-harm without giving instructions on how to turn everyday objects into weapons. That said, I do feel like there was way less of it in the novel than what I'd heard from other people. It was really just focused in the very beginning of the story. For me, it felt less instructional for self-harm and actually more resourceful for teens experiencing homelessness. There are just so many things that Charlie does and the way that she thinks based on her previous experiences that help her survive that I never would have thought of coming from such a privileged life. If you're sensitive to issues like depression, self-harm, suicide, substance abuse, sexual assault, and homelessness, I definitely would recommend exerting caution going into this book because I think it totally does have the potential to be triggering. But for me, I found it more focused on resiliency and overall healing as opposed to the negative aspects. I really fell for Charlie as a protagonist. We do have many differences, but I was also really able to relate to her on a deep level, and I was just rooting for her the entire time. I can't remember the last time I had read a book where I was really like vying for the main character to get everything she could possibly want out of life. One of the things that did turn me off about this book is the toxic relationship with an older man that Charlie has. Had he have been just like a little bit more redeemable, I think people would have more easily been able to recognize his toxic traits and apply it to their own lives. Of course, this is based on my own experience, and people all the time fail to see red flags in people that are really bad for them, but he was just like so characteristically the bad older dude that I couldn't see past that, and I felt like it would have been more effective if there was some subtlety and redeemable qualities. Also, I didn't really care for the writing. It wasn't necessarily bad, but I did feel like it was trying to be a bit too literary or metaphorical at times. There's this one line that really stands out to me that's like, don't let the cereal box eat you. It's just a cereal box. Like, what the fuck does that mean? There are so many lines that just like felt like they were trying to be this like iconic John Green-esque YA quote, and I just couldn't help but roll my eyes. It's not a perfect book by any means. There are definite flaws to it, and my reading experience was a bit disruptive because of that small reading slump. But overall, this story really touched me. It's one I'm going to carry with me for a very long time. And if people are looking for more like really nitty-gritty, dark, intense contemporaries about mental health issues, I definitely think Girl in Pieces is one you should put on your list. On a lighter note, the next book I read in 2020 was Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Oseman. I actually picked this up kind of in the middle of Girl in Pieces to kind of like reset my reading motivation, and I ended up finishing this in one sitting before even getting up from the table, and it totally got me back on track to where I wanted to be. I ended up giving Volume 3 of Heartstopper 4 out of 5 stars. I would say currently this is my least favorite in the series, but it was still a really great, enjoyable read. I feel like there's not a ton to judge this book on, and what it attempts to do, it does pretty well, so there's not many criticisms I really can have. Heartstopper really stands out to me as having great representation for what real queer teen relationships can look like. The cast is super lovable, each character is unique and has their own personality, and their dynamic is just really wholesome. They grow as a group really well together, and I enjoy reading from them. I feel like people aren't gonna fully get what I'm trying to say with this. I feel like because the series has kind of set the precedent that it is this cute, adorable, fluffy, romantic, queer love story, and everything is going to turn out happy and positive at the end, that now it is becoming predictable. There's like very little suspense that I feel, and I kind of want more conflict. Heartstopper is kind of like a direct contrast to the many LGBTQ stories in the past that are primarily focused on the pain and suffering of the individuals. It's not that I want the main characters to be like writhing in pain, but so far it seems like there's a pattern that every obstacle the characters encounter is either resolved really easily or has no consequences, and I just feel like Heartstopper is capable of more nuance and depth. It's not that there's been no conflict, but I just want the characters to be challenged more, and where Volume 3 ends, I feel like there's ample opportunity to explore some other issues for the main characters, and I'm really excited for it. Don't let my critiques make you think that I didn't absolutely love this book. I had the best time reading it, and I'm already super hyped for Volume 4. To close out this video, I have the last 2 books that I've read in 2020 thus far, which I've actually both finished this morning as of filming. First up is They Went Left by Monica Hess. Now again, to be transparent, I was paid to promote this book as a part of the Barnes & Noble book club, but I'm really grateful I had the opportunity to do so, not only to work with one of the largest bookstore chains in the world, but also because I never would have picked up this book if I hadn't, and I really, really enjoyed it. Historical fiction is a genre I like actively avoid, but I was so encaptured by this story way more than I had expected, and ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. This book is set in 1945 Poland and Germany, and it follows a girl who was recently liberated from a concentration camp and is on a mission to find her brother. I can't really speak to the historical accuracy as it's not a genre I'm really proficient in, but I will say that it did seem consistent with the atmosphere of other books that I've read set in World War II and during the Holocaust. But a way this book stands out from some of the others that I've read is it is set after the liberation of the camps and really focuses on what the lives of survivors are like as they are returning to their old lives but also can never go back. I felt this book had super accurate representation for what it is like living with post-traumatic stress disorder, and also a really strong theme of resiliency and survival. It is a heavy book that is going to make you feel things, and there were actually quite a few plot twists I was really not expecting, but despite the darker, more intense elements of the book, it does not feel like tragedy porn. Zofia was also such a great main character to read from, very similar to Charlie from Girl in Pieces. Like, I just wanted the best for this girl, and I was cheering her on the entire time. And initially, I didn't really care for the romance in this story. That's like a common theme for me with YA novels a lot lately. The romances just aren't doing it for me. The romance is like a really understated subplot in my opinion, and not at all intrusive into the story. I did eventually find myself pretty invested, or more invested than I expected, and I really liked the way the characters begun to care for each other. but I still feel like they just didn't have the strongest foundation to build on. The prose was really pretty. There were some incredibly profound lines throughout the book, and so I really love this book way more than I expected to. I think if you are someone who doesn't pick up a lot of historical fiction like myself, or you might be a huge historical fiction lover, this is a book that I think is going to satisfy a lot of people, and I really recommend you pick it up. And the final book I have read in 2020 so far is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I really did not know anything about Crawdad when I had initially wanted to pick it up. I just heard so many people raving about it, knew I wanted to read more adult fiction, so I decided to give it a chance. It's about a young girl named Kaya, and it follows her as she grows up in the marsh, pretty much alone and separated from society. And as she gets older, it reaches a point in the story where a town person has been murdered, and because Kaya is the weird marsh girl that doesn't interact with people, she is accused of the murder. This is one of those books that is so good, I don't have the words to tell you how good it is. My job is to talk to you about books, and I don't have them. Words are not coming from my head and coming through my mouth. Kaya is an incredible main character to read from. She is so easy to love, and I've realized that I have been saying this for a lot of the main characters that I've been reading, but I just really was rooting for her the entire time. It was so inspiring to read about this girl who has built her life almost entirely on her own, and then to grow to her full potential with a group of really genuine supporters. It just warmed my heart. It was surprisingly introspective because Kaya's life is so incredibly different from my own, and I've never encountered many of the struggles that she does. So it made me really reflect on my privileges, my upbringing, and how that influences how I view the world. The prose is so gorgeous. Delia Owens has an incredible writing style and an eye for detail because the book is so descriptive and really transports you right to this marsh town in North Carolina. I do feel like the story kind of faltered a little bit during the murder trial. That was the part I was least interested in, and I felt like it kind of went through a little bit quickly, and I was just much more interested in reading about Kaya living her life growing up. I feel like you're forced to kind of step outside of your own bubble in order to really understand Kaya in a way I don't think I've ever had to do for a character before, and that's really special for me. And the ending of this book kind of threw me for a loop. Like I said, I just finished it this morning, like hours ago, so I'm not totally sure how I feel about it yet. At first I was so caught off guard that I was like, I don't know if I really like this. But I'm slowly realizing that it's actually so brilliant and changes the entire way I feel about this story and what it is meant to do. This book was really good. I ended up giving it, I think 4.5 stars is what I have settled on, but it really touched me in a profound way. It's a story I'm going to be thinking on for a while and will definitely be recommending to other readers and non-readers alike. It's a truly unique, one-of-a-kind story, and I feel like everyone should be given the chance to experience it. Alrighty, well, that concludes my second episode of recent reads, all of the books I've currently read in 2020. I am quite far behind on my Goodreads challenge, but who cares because I'm reading good books that I am really enjoying, and I hope you are too. In the comments below, I would love to know what books you have been reading recently, or if you have any thoughts on any of the books that I have recently read, feel free to share them below. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you soon for a new one. Bye!